Okay, so today we're gonna try something new because I have all of these. And these. And these. I have all sorts of white stuff. Now, if you remember my art haul from, I don't know, some stupid amount of time ago, I told you that I was going to compare a whole bunch of white stuff to see what the best white stuff was. Well, I have finally done it. I have 44 different kinds of white stuff to try. Why 44? Well, my favorite number is 4, but 4 wasn't enough. So I decided 2 4s was better than 1, and hence we have 44. And now I'm going to switch over to voiceover mode because this is going to be a whole lot of information and a whole lot of nonsense.
Okay, so this is in fact, as the title suggests, a very large white stuff comparison. White stuff being the name that I call anything that you apply to artwork once it is nearly finished to add white shines and highlights back into the image specifically. If you like this video and want another one, I did think perhaps I would do a comparison of white stuff that compares things that require an applicator of some kind. But anyway, that's for later. Also, I apologize in advance for my haunted camera again. I had a lot of problems with the little ghost in my camera zooming in and out at random while I was recording this video. Oh, and also, just to note, I purchased every single pen, marker, etc. that I am testing in this video with my own money, so no bias here, just honestly presenting my findings in the hopes that it will help some of you out. Alright, with all that out of the way, for today's comparison, the white things consist of anything with a self-contained applicator that is wet when applied. That was my criteria in this particular instance, which is why you won't see anything like white-colored pencils on this list. So for this test, I collected as many different gel pens, chalk markers, water-based paint markers, oil-based paint markers, enamel-based paint markers, just anything I could find really, and with as much variety as I could possibly muster up. So I could see if there was any one type of white stuff that performed better overall than others. I did all of my initial testing in my Canson XL black drawing sketchbook. On each page I created sections, and in each section I wrote with each white thing the following: the brand and name of the writing implement and the price that I paid for it, then what type of white stuff was in the pen or marker. For the most part, the options were gel pen, chalk ink, acrylic paint, water-based ink, oil-based paint, though there were a few outliers. I also recorded how badly it smelled while I was using it. I have a very sensitive nose, so something with a high odor isn't going to be realistic for me to use regularly, no matter how opaque it is. Next, I used those lines of text to determine how smoothly it writes, and recorded that. It either writes smoothly or has spotty writing. I also recorded if the ink was blotchy, which basically equated to the ink soaking into the paper somewhat, so the coverage was spotty rather than being a solid, opaque color. After that, I also recorded a standard up and down curve like you do for practice and hand lettering, and recorded if there was any way to get any line variation. Some of the markers I tested had softer felt tips or brush tips, and so variation was possible, so I wanted to record the ones where it was an option in case that was particularly important to anyone. After that, I drew one long, straight, continuous line to see how consistent lines are. I have had many pens in the past that skipped in the middle of writing lines or wouldn't write one solid continuous line, so I wanted to test that and see how they compared. And then I also drew a box and filled it in for each one, because I figured that was the best way to see how solid and opaque the white pigment was, and if it sat on top of the paper or tried to sink into the fibers, anything like that. Once I had finished that for all of the 44 white things, I decided I needed to see them in a practical application. So I painted a watercolor wash on some Arches cold press paper. I used my alcohol-based Copic markers on Express-It blending card, and burnished some paper with colored pencils. For those who don't know, burnishing with colored pencil is just when you press quite roughly with a colored pencil. Usually when you're trying to do your final layer of blending with colored pencil, as it tends to destroy the tooth of the paper, which gives the paper a very, very smooth feel. And it's very difficult to get things to stick to the paper on top of that layer of burnished colored pencil, especially markers that are wet, because the ink tends to slip right off the paper. The ruined tooth just makes it particularly challenging, so I wanted to see what stuck to it and what wouldn't. Also, as far as testing watercolor, I usually have trouble getting gel pen in particular to stick to watercolor paintings. I'm not sure if it's because of the rough texture of the cold press paper that I prefer to use, or the watercolor pigment that sits on top of the paper resisting the ink, or what exactly. But that's definitely usually a challenge, so I wanted to include it in my tests. And of course, I just like to use alcohol markers, so I included a test of alcohol ink as well, even though most things don't mind writing on top of alcohol. Markers. Then I cut them all into rectangles, glued them into each section of the sketchbook with tacky glue, and once they were dry, I went through with each white thing and wrote on top of the different types of media to see how well they did. The order of each kind of media in each section is always the same. Watercolor is the farthest left, alcohol ink is next to the watercolor swatch toward the right, and then on the right-hand side of the section is burnished colored pencil. And finally, the last thing I tested is drying time. Since each of these are specifically wet media to one extent or another, I wanted to know how long it took for each pen or marker to dry. So I took the pen, set a timer, and marked the paper a few times. Then I used my finger to see if I could smudge the ink after 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, etc., until it stopped smudging, and whatever the earliest time was that it didn't smudge was what I wrote down for drying time. I'm a very impatient person, so the speed at which it dries definitely makes a difference to me. If anyone is interested in my full spreadsheet of data, I will link it in the description box below, along with scans of all of my test pages so you can see how everything wrote on the black paper, watercolor, alcohol ink, and colored pencils. I really hope this was helpful to you guys because it was a lot of work, though I did have a really good time doing it. In general, the water-based pigments and acrylic paints, as well as certain gel pens, tended to do the best, while the oil-based markers tended to do the worst. Just as a sort of general trend I noticed across all these things. After all that, I decided on my top 10 white things from this video. And of those top 10, since this video clearly isn't long enough already, I decided to take the top 3 and do one piece of each type of art medium I tested them out on top of: watercolor, alcohol marker, and colored pencil, and use one of each of the top 3 to make highlights. But yeah, with that, whew, it's finally over. After all that information, as well as downloads down in the description box, don't forget to check those out if you want to see my findings in greater detail. Please like this video if you enjoyed the fruits of my labor. I would really appreciate it. And let me know in the comments if you like videos like this. This was definitely a massive comparison, but there is certainly more white stuff that I could compare, so let me know if you'd be interested in seeing a white stuff comparison part 2. Maybe one about dry applications, colored pencils and things like that, or white stuff that doesn't come housed in its own applicator like white drawing inks and paints, etc., to see how those things stack up against these comparisons. But anyway, please subscribe for more fun and interesting art-related videos, and until next time, I'll talk to you all later. Now, on to the speed paints.